Welcome to Deges and Dragons.
I thought this was going to be hard.
Welcome to Deges and Dragons.
Who wants some of the Ripper?
They're state champs, baby. Woo!
He's clearly Captain Crunch. I'm a man of the people.
Shattered world.
Ripper knows. Ripper always knows.
Oh, guys, it is here. It's here. Deges and Dragons Season 2 has officially debuted. And you know what that means? That means that once again I can say, welcome to the Degecast, the supplemental podcast to the show where us degenerates take a therapeutic look into tabletop role-playing games. I'm your host, Nate Lindberg, and you can follow me all over Twitter at Nate Lindberg, and you can follow our brand at Degetime. Now, Season 2 is officially kicked off with our therapeutic look at Retrostar, an amazing and simple game that allows you to create your very own sci-fi 70s or 80s TV show. And now you also may have noticed for the first time ever, it's neither Conrad nor myself in the Dege Master chair. This time, the creator of the game, Barak Blackburn, has graciously offered to envelop us into his masterfully crafted world. Now, Barak is also a board member for our great friends at the Bodhana Group, a nonprofit organization where they promote, endorse, research, apply, and, well, do anything else that you can possibly think of when it comes to tabletop role-playing games and the therapeutic applications of them. Now, he was also gracious enough to sit down for one of our long-form creator interviews, and now this interview might seem a little bit disjointed, and that's because we actually weren't planning on recording it when we did. We just all happened to have the time, and we did it completely unprepared. So, without further ado, let's pretend that the Barak in our recording of the interview can hear my voice this very second as I say, Barak, welcome to the show, and thank you very much for not just your time here today, but for being our very first non-Dege therapeutic GM.
Oh, sure. It's my pleasure. I always enjoy running games for people, and I always enjoy sort of introducing people to new games. And this is, you got in touch with me and said you wanted to see how this game would work. So to me, that's awesome. So it was my pleasure to do it. I'm happy to do so.
Awesome. Glad to hear it. And of course, with me as well would be, hey, he is the permanent member of our Deges and Dragons player panel, and he is he's helping me edit a lot of these things now, guys. He's moving on up in the world, and that is Mr. Tony Shermuxness.
What's up?
What is up, my friend? And also, we have our therapy expert and our typical game master, but he's slacking this time around here, and that is Mr. Conrad Audette.
Hello, taking on, or you've now just recently seen me taking on the role of Popsy, which I'm super excited to continue. And just like sidebar on that, Barak doesn't actually know us and didn't know us prior to this, and then sent these character backgrounds. And I'm just sitting there and I'm like, this is like the exact character I would have created for myself.
Yeah, and, no, like all the characters are kind of like just spot on for us too. I mean, it's funny that you gave my character cybernetic eyes because I actually have a prosthetic in my left eye that me and my friends jokingly call my cyber eye.
Oh wow! Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Paul is like,
Prodigy.
Yeah, like he's like the theater guy. Like he like teaches Chinese, but he's also the theater director. And his middle name is David.
Nice.
Just like, man, the way that these lined up. So like people who have watched are probably like, we made these characters, we didn't. It was like the most amazing coincidence.
So when you guys asked me and you said you wanted to do the Family Nuclear series, and sort of gave me what you wanted the character. So the series I've written had characters. You guys said we'd like to play characters like this. It just gave me grandfather, mother, brother-in-law, and son. I was like, okay. So I spent some time sort of coming up with the names and figuring it out and presented them to you, knowing nothing other than just what the roles were. So I'm glad that they fit well. That's a great coincidence.
No, it was really cool. Like looking at it, like even like this is the first time I'm actually role playing a woman. I've never actually played a character who was a different gender than myself. So which is cool, but also a lot of the characteristics of Ellie are kind of similar to my own. So it was like all of them were. I was almost like Conrad. You helped him. You did. I swear.
That was my initial thought too. I'm like, oh, more Conrad. Oh, more characters Conrad made. It's like, oh wait, no, he didn't make those. That's too much coincidence there.
Yeah, right. All right. So I guess to kick off the interview proper here, we'll I'm going to do what I normally do and go over to Conrad, and we'll get him to get things started.
Okay, so so we see that Retrostar is part of Spectrum Games.
Yep.
And so how did you come to meet, and what was the original inspiration?
Oh, so my history with Spectrum. So I've been a fan of Spectrum since Cartoon Action Hour Season 1, which was quite a while ago, published through Z-Man Games.
Which we will be playing later on in the season 2, and I'm looking forward to that.
Oh, there you go. Well, if you need a GM, let me know. So are you playing Season 1 or Season 3?
We have, all the materials we have are Season 3, I think, but I have a lot of material, so I haven't gone through all of them.
No, Season 1 was again, a long, long time ago. So I approached Cynthia. I was running a superheroes game. We started with one system. That wasn't quite doing it. We moved to another one. Wasn't quite doing it. And I decided to sort of take a stab at coming up with something of my own based on Cartoon Action Hour Season 1. I contacted Cynthia as I began sort of creating this thing and said, hey, have you ever thought of doing a superhero game? And she said, sort of. And I said, well, I've been working on this thing, and we chatted some, and she said, yeah, let's do it. So I created Capes, Cows, and Villains Foul, which is our superhero game, which is meant to sort of, well, it's a comic book superhero game. It's meant to sort of feel like a comic book in play. And that's, so I did that, and that actually inspired Cartoon Action Hour Season 3. So some of what I did there and sort of tweaking the system made its way to Cartoon Action Hour Season 3. And through that process, Cynthia wanted to sort of expand the Spectrum team some, so she brought me on, and so she's the top, and then I'm right here and sort of stuff. So she developed stuff, and then there are times where we'll develop together. So Urban Manhunt, what she did, that was all hers, and she was like, hey, could you write a little here and a little there? And I was like, sure. Retrostar was an idea she had. So Spectrum is big into genre emulation, which is trying to make a game that plays and feels like a certain thing. It doesn't. It's sort of like, hey, here's a D20 Thundar game. It's like, no, let's make our own system that feels like a cartoon. So Retrostar was our attempt to make a game that felt like 1970s sci-fi TV shows, which is pretty niche in terms of like sort of specificity of game. You know, you're not talking like sci-fi, you're talking 70s sci-fi television shows. So not even 70s movies. So we're down this narrow path. And so I would say, for a couple of years, this was just an idea that was just sort of germinating there. And we had this sort of idea for the whole, she had this idea for the whole thing and said she wanted 3 stats and sort of like left me to sort of come up with my own devices. And I, as I was a writing major in college, I pounded my head against the wall. I finally looked up and saw it was a stair and pulled myself up. So I finally sort of figured out the way I was going to approach it. So that's how I came in. And so we've done other games since then. The core idea of the system for Retrostar, the intention system, she's used for Stories from the Crypt and or Stories from the Grave, I think, and some other, and the radio on the air, or radio role-playing game. So it's a sort of weird in-house system we've got for ourselves. But that's how I got involved with Spectrum, to answer the question.
Very cool.
Cool. And now, was this on Kickstarter? Because that's one of the questions that we have in the template, but I don't.
No, this was sort of prior to Kickstarter being the default way to sort of launch a game, and we sort of just developed it in-house, and then it kind of came together, and we released it. The big bummer is Cynthia had contacted Richard Hatch, star of Battlestar Galactica, and he was going to write a forward for the game, and he had like family issues that came up, and obviously he passed away before he could. So that's one of the sort of regrets that we have. Cynthia spoke. I never spoke with him. Cynthia had spoken with him quite a bit and said that he was a super nice guy, and obviously things come up in people's lives. And it's not like writing the forward for Retrostar is going to pay a lot of bills for him. He just seemed like a genuine guy who was happy to do a thing here. So
no, that's really cool. That's cool that like somebody like that would actually take time to do that. Like, I like for me it would be like if I was to do something like that and like Patrick Stewart was to write the forward. Yeah, that'd be great.
Yes. Yep. Absolutely.
So I guess the flip side of that question then is just how long did it take to develop Retrostar?
I would say if I were gonna put a number on it, I'd say 3 years. Okay. And sort of the first 2 of that was like it was a back burner idea. It was this like, I want to do a thing. And we didn't really know what it was going to be. And it was sort of just thinking about what the thing would be. And then I would say, like, once I sort of had the main idea, and I tried a bunch of different things and a bunch of different approaches towards dice mechanics, and stuff like this. And I kept coming back, and I would sit down and watch 2 or 3 episodes of a 70s sci-fi TV show. And I'd always ask myself, how would this happen in a game? How would we get to this result? And it had to do with the special effects budget, but also had to do with sort of the weird twists and turns of 70s sci-fi TV shows took. So it was sort of trying to emulate. It wasn't trying to make a game. So you have a game like Hero or Champions, which is approaching superheroes from a very different way. Does a Champions combat feel like a comic book combat? I would argue it does not. Champions does a certain thing. It puts very granular statistics on a character, and your character can interact with the world in a certain way. We wanted our games to feel like the media that inspired it. So we wanted the game to feel akin to a 70s TV show and sort of pacing. So it was that idea that I kept coming back to. And that's when sort of the idea of approaching something and thinking of the story beats of it and how we get to these story beats and what happens in these story beats sort of came to be. So it's a very, and you guys have played it, it's a very loose system meant to sort of just move action forward. So it was about 2 years of sort of thinking about ideas and going back to the drawing board, throwing everything out, coming back to the drawing board and trying to figure out how to get that pace of play down and just right.
Awesome. And I know we talked a little bit off air about this too, but other than developing tabletop games, what else do you do for work?
Well, I do work with Spectrum. I have my own little imprint where I publish little zine games. I publish about 4 of those a year. I was a Game Chef finalist last year. I have a game I submitted for Golden Cobra this year. I'll know in a week or so if I did anything with that. And that's, for the viewers, I'll know. So maybe we'll edit it and I won, or I can say I didn't. So I publish about 3 or 4 of those a year on my own. I kickstart them most of the time, and we're talking like $500, to kick, because they're just little games like this. Let's see. So here's the one I did for Game Chef. It is Ekphrasis, a literary parlor game and storytelling game for 2 players. It's about blackout poetry and sort of 2 people sitting together for about an hour it takes, and you sort of tell a story with that. These don't pay the bills, though. To pay the bills, I work at a small independent school. I'm the director of technology, as well as I have dormitory duties as well, sort of monitoring the kids here. And obviously, with everything the way it is, there was a lot of work with technology because of remote learning and hybrid learning and all that. So I've been busy.
I hear you there. I'm an IT guy myself, so been a very, very busy time this past 6-7 months here.
Oh yeah,
big time. I used to do IT for schools, and I do not envy you, especially right now.
Oh, I things are going fine. We are small. We have a small budget, and I think one of my strengths is sort of that ability to think small. So we got all our orders in. I know other schools are still waiting on Chromebooks. We got everything in. We're done, and the launch has been successful so far. So
that's awesome. That's awesome to hear. Awesome to hear. So now, in doing this and creating these games, whether it is Retrostar or any of these other games that you've worked on, is there something that you found to be therapeutic, while working on these, and actually in that creative process?
Well, I think I said earlier. So when the pandemic started, and I remember it was March 11th, things went south for all of us, right? Everything just got kind of sort of dark and dismal. We holed up. We were quarantined. We were home alone, and I wrote a couple little they're sort of micro games for a charity bundle. And I realized that because I live where I work and because I was still working, but there wasn't much to do. There was no one here on campus, but I'd show up every day and I'd do my thing. But I was just spending a lot of time because there's nothing you could do. None of us could go out. You could go shopping when you sort of, put on your hazmat suit. So I had time in my hands and I had energy. And so for me, I realized because I have this time and energy that I could go out and I could do things to sort of try and help others. So for instance, I've been doing a playlist every week. I either listen to an album or I'll come up with a playlist, and then I'll make a Google slideshow and I'll share it every week with people. And it's sort of a way for me to spend an hour doing something, but also a way for me to share with others. I
like that.
I did a thing where I, told people on Facebook. I said, look, if you want a letter from me, let me know, and I'll send you a handwritten letter. Let's encourage the postal service. And I've run games for people, and I've been running things. I did stuff early on. We were doing some readings. Paul, who's a theater major, would appreciate this. We would take TV scripts and we would sort of approach them in entirely weird, new, different ways, but sort of do them. We weren't recording them. It was just for fun. It was just to get together for an hour with people and sort of connect with people.
Yeah.
And I think, so then getting to gaming, I think gaming is a way we can sort of connect with one another and do things. And I try in my game designs, I try and make them relatively easy to sort of step into, have them ask sort of interesting questions in a way to sort of engage everyone and not have the rules sort of weigh the thing down. Just sort of have it to be like a nice discussion, a nice conversation, a nice way to sort of have some fun with people. I think I tend to approach games as let's have fun. And if that means it gets a little comedic, that's okay for me. But let's just have a good. I mean, you guys play with me, like I'm just kind of easy going, and none of this is a condemnation of any other type of gaming, but it's more that's the way I tend to do things, and I think that can be therapeutic. I think also sort of having a system where rules don't get in the way is a way that we can sort of like have a nice communication and sort of get something in there. So you're not sort of hyper focused on rules. You're just like, hey, I want to do this thing. Great, let me help you do it. So I approach running a game as I'm here to facilitate and I'm here to help the players have a good time. And it is not confrontational. Many game masters, I think, sort of view things confrontationally. My job running a game at a convention, running a game for strangers, running a game for my friends is to help them. Like, oh, if you did this and this combo, that's going to do this awesome thing. Oh, I can do that? Yeah, please do it. Like, that's great. Some players will be like, no, I don't want to do it. Okay, you don't have to do it. I'm just telling you, like, a cool effect will happen if you do this thing. And they'll be like, that's awesome. And then a lot of people, they'll hand out character sheets and be like, great. Then they're like, you guys should have done this, this, and this. And I'm like, how did we know? Like, none of us know the rules the way you know the rules. So it's that sort of engaging people, but sort of giving them the tools to do the things that they want to do and to be awesome. Because whenever we play a game, don't we all want to be awesome?
Oh, by far.
Of course.
And so it's my job to make everyone be awesome. So let's all be awesome together.
I 100% agree. Let's all be awesome together. So how now? And I know we talked a little bit about this off air, but I know you do work with the Bodhana Group. I was wondering if you maybe talk a little bit about that as well, because we have had Jack on the show before. Jack's had a lot of inspiration for us, and he's worked a lot with Conrad on season 2 in general.
Nice.
I'd like to hear you like a little bit.
So Jack is a big Spectrum guy, so he's a big Spectrum fan, and we became friends the way people do Facebook or whatever. He was a big fan of things, and I went to Save 1 year to like run some games and do some stuff in it. Have you guys been to Save at all?
Yeah, actually, we haven't been to the physical location,
Okay.
but this last year, Conrad and I both ran some games for Sin Against Fear.
Yeah.
So the physical location is down in Pennsylvania, and it's what it is. But like the games I was running were not necessarily what they were looking for, and that's normally the case at a gaming convention. However, I really liked what they were doing, and I liked a lot of what they had. And I've always been, this idea of therapeutic gaming to me is so wonderful and sort of so neat and a way for kids, adults, and anyone to sort of to learn a different language and to learn to sort of do something else. And so after I went this 1 year and I got permission from my school to go, and they started supported me, and I told you guys, my school was like, we want you to do some more like professional development. And, if you work in different types of fields, they'll give you like, your list of like, here's what you have to do in the next year. And like, I'm the only tech guy here. So it's hard for me to be like, I'm going to go on a 2-week conference because everything would collapse. So, and it's just tough. But then I was like, hey, what about if I helped out with this group that I really believe in? And they asked for information about it. I was like, they're a nonprofit. They're about therapeutic gaming. They're about, sort of helping, kids out. And, they have this stuff here. And they were like, that sounds great. And so I offered to help out and did so. And I was like, oh, I should, see if I can do more. And Jack was like, yeah, you can apply to be on the board. So I applied to be on the board. I was approved. And so now I'm on the board of a nonprofit. So I like what I bring to the table, and it's an interesting group of people there, but so I can bring some sort of like, I understand the intricacies of bureaucracy here. I have some tech knowledge here that I can help you with. I know that this is a good solution for this. And, so we all bring stuff. We're all passionate about sort of the idea of therapy, the idea of helping people, gaming being a big part of this, but then we all bring our different skill sets to the table, to the board. So.
Cool.
And again, I've worked in schools for coming up on 20 years now. So, I have that idea of dealing with kids, and the schools I've worked at have both been sort of 9th grade and younger schools, so the groups that they have generally skew a little bit older, but I think there's such knowledge to be gained from dealing with these younger kids and from dealing with kids. And if you work with kids, I think a lot of people that work with kids, they come at it from a certain approach. I try and come at it from the approach of like, I can remember being a kid. And I can remember the shifty things I did as a kid and the reasons why I did shifty things, and sort of, so I try and communicate with them. And some of the kids think I'm utterly weird, but some of them they'll roll their eyes and they don't sort of understand and get it. So I like sort of helping kids, obviously, and sort of bring it over to the therapy and gaming, that's just another way to do that.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. No, it's like when we kind of got hooked up with Bodhana, it's like I know Conrad and I both were like kind of over the moon with what you guys do, kind of, and then mixed in with what we're trying to do as well. It was just a really cool like amalgamation, if you will, of kind of two different entities, and
nice synergy.
Yeah, synergy. There you go. That's a better word than amalgamation. Yeah.
Well, and what's really interesting is that for a lot of places, and a lot of organizations, businesses, whatever, the pandemic and the quarantine has been really bad. And I can't say we made as much money, but we reached twice as many sort of therapists and counselors this year, sort of going online. So like that's huge, because that's the goal, to reach those people. So then we look at it and we're like, that's amazing. How can we do more of that? In my opinion, it's like, let's focus on that. Like offering gaming to people is great, but let's focus on this cool thing where we are sort of offering stuff to, because there are people from around the world, our thing, whereas normally it's people from the Northeast who are willing to drive to central Pennsylvania. So,
right.
So if you work at a school, anytime it's Columbus Day weekend, so that's always difficult for people because they have stuff going on. If you work at a school, it's like your parents' weekend, or you take a vacation. So this way we could reach people. So someone could be like, I have stuff going on, but I can do a panel from 8 to midnight. So I'm going to do this panel and get my professional, training in. So it was great. Everyone's very excited about what's going to be going forward with that. So
yeah, I know we had a blast. We ran a couple games, like you said, and where we participated. Conrad and I participated in a game, and it was fun. I can't wait till actually like go and meet in person. We're fledgling. We're barely a year old yet, so this we haven't been able to get down there because we weren't a thing. But
yeah, our recording's barely a year old. We launched in mid-April.
yeah.
So yeah.
It seems like it seems like a field that you and myself are getting into right as the wave is cresting, coming up. You know what I mean? So it's not like we're 10 years behind the curve. We're sort of right there as like it's becoming more and more of a thing. So it's very exciting, I think.
Yeah.
Agreed.
I've talked to I was able to present our whole project to my company, and I got a lot of good feedback from the company. People that have kind of heard about. There's some people that heard about like using gaming as therapy, but like hadn't really explored it or anything like that. And which was interesting to me, because it's like when Conrad approached me with it, it's not really an idea or anything that I had heard of before. But now, like you said, it's kind of it is something people more starting to think about now. So it's interesting, definitely interesting.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, you guys, if it happens in person, you should definitely get down. Bodhana did some panels at Gen Con as well. And if you guys, obviously we've discussed off air, if you guys ever do anything in this area, let me know, because we're not far from each other ultimately. Much closer than Pennsylvania, which is about 6 or 7 hours. So
well, hey, with any luck, season 3 we'll be able to do in person. So maybe we'll have you come over to the North Shore and actually play a game with us.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, do you guys
our makeshift studio in Conrad's basement?
That's what anyone should be. Do you all do any sort of conventions or anything in the area?
So we go, like, we've gone to PAX, we've gone to Comic-Con, but we haven't actually like we go as just fans. Like we don't go. We haven't actually like done anything yet.
Not with this. Yeah, I volunteered a few times for Games on Demand to demonstrate indie games.
Yeah. But after PAX, was that?
PAX, yeah.
Okay, gotcha. And we're going off on a tangent here. If you all ever, if life returns to normal, if you ever consider going to Gen Con, feel free to hit me up, and we can touch base on Facebook or whatever. I'll connect. I'm happy to help sort of coordinate that. I've been a bunch of times. I figured out a bunch of things that work well and whatever. So
cool.
Sort of a tangent, because there's an educator trade day on Wednesday, which has neat stuff. And Jack's done stuff there. I do stuff there for sort of education and gaming. I presented a couple times. It's overwhelming year one, but there's a lot there for gamers too. You know what I mean? And it's okay to be overwhelmed. Just go and be like, I'm just going to take it in and be like, oh man, this is 100 times the scale I was thinking. And that's okay. And then the next year be like, oh, it'd be cool to do something. And you can meet up with people, and there's really some interesting stuff there. So, and games around here, I don't know. My friend and I, there's a convention up in Portland, Maine, PortCon, which we've gone to and we've presented at, and that's the sort of thing where because that's not super far from you in the grand scheme of things, right? Because you're all in Eastern Mass. So, and they're looking for sort of material as well. And you could run games, and you could probably give presentations if you like or whatever. So
cool. Yeah, no, that sounds great. That sounds great. I know Gen Con's something like I'd love to get to. I'd love to get to.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know me and my regular gaming group have been talking about, a Gen Con trip for years now.
Yeah.
Well, like I said, whether professionally or just as fans, feel free to hit me up, and I'm happy to sort of help and give you some this is a thing to do here, this is a thing to do here, but you do have to go and just take it in as yourself. So,
as I think you do at any one of those cons, like you walk around like PAX. I walk into PAX every year, and I'm just like, oh my god, what do I do?
Yeah, absolutely. And I didn't know because it's weird to find gaming conventions, and New England is small in the grand scheme of things. You could fit all of New England in like Pennsylvania practically.
Pretty much.
But the sort of finding gaming conventions and stuff like this, like I know they're around, but it's sort of hard to find them. Like I know there are a couple out, Eastern Massachusetts and stuff, but there's like small ones too, which are, it's not as easy to reach people at, but just as fans, it's fun to go to.
So to bring us back from this tangent, I guess here. So how do you feel that Retrostar could actually help people therapeutically? Obviously, that's something we're going to be tackling ourselves in Dungeons and Dragons, but we'd like to hear kind of your thoughts on that.
So I think Retrostar is interesting because Retrostar is all about sort of making a commitment to do something, and then there being potential consequences. Most games get very granular with their consequences. You enter combat, and you have 100 hit points, and you know that this thing does this much per, and you can sort of game the game and game the system. And that kind of takes out some of the sort of the sense of danger of them. We're all, as human beings, live in a world where we have to make choices to do things. Like there's a pretty woman at the restaurant, and I'm going to go talk to her. That's a choice we're going to make. We don't know what might happen, right? We do not know how that's going to turn out, but we do it anyway, thinking we run the numbers, but we can't have any idea to know what's going to happen. Retrostar, the core mechanic is based on that design, that you're going to try and do something, and something's going to happen because of that. You're going to fail, you're going to succeed, there's going to be some middle ground with that, but we're not going to get into sort of nitpicking about what it is. We're going to say, just like real life, we have to make a choice and we have to do something. And I think the mechanics of it are relatively simple, and it engages in a discussion. So if we were playing Retrostar and I said, well, I think I'm going to go try and talk to this attractive woman, the GM might say, okay, well, that's, you're going to roll this dice. And I could say, well, what's going to happen? And the game master would say, well, I don't know. Let's see what happens when you roll the dice. Because just like in life, we don't know what's going to happen. And you can't get into the idea. So in my game design, I'm going to pause for a minute, but it's relevant. I always try to think of the worst players I know. And I don't mean worst bad. I mean the worst that sort of run the metagaming aspect of it and sort of grind the numbers. And I've been that player. Maybe we all have. I don't know any of you as players. And it's not an insult. It's not a bad thing. But you want to find someone who's going to try and break the game. The best story I can tell is playing 2nd edition D&D. There's the Blade Barrier spell, which does a ton of damage, right? If you've ever played 2nd edition D&D, I don't know if you have. Blade Barrier does 8d8 plus whatever.
It's pretty obscene.
Yeah, well, we had a character who had so many hit points, he's like, oh, I just walked through the Blade Barrier. And the GM's like, no, you can't do that. And he's like, why? But that idea that he was just all it's going to do is this much damage. I'll still have plenty of hit points. I just walked through it. And, sort of that idea that you can game the system in such a way to take the fun and immersion out of it. Retrostar is really designed to sort of immerse you in it, and you don't know what's going to happen with anything, good or bad. And I think because of the simplicity of it, and because it's all about what you're trying to do in a scene, makes it a lot more interesting. Then, you play Dungeons and Dragons, and it says under diplomacy, if you get, 5 higher than the person you're bartering with, they'll sell it to you for 20% of cost. Oh, I make my roll. Look, I got 5 higher, 20% off. Not role playing, right? That's just, you're just crunching numbers. So, Retrostar is really designed on that sort of idea that let's see what happens. Let's have it be the great unknown.
Those are more of my favorite games. The ones that kind of drive the narrative,
Yep.
That's so as of this recording, we've only actually played one act of Retrostar, but what I really liked about it is the fact that it is played in acts like that. So you kind of have rather than it's okay, let's gather everybody together after you go and grab weapons from the blacksmith and food rations and all that, and it's just kind of like this. Okay, the act ends, and now we're going to pick up somewhere else. You guys did all this. You might have done this stuff or whatever. But I like that. It's kind of that's a cool little cool aspect of it. So
yeah, and that and it drives the narrative, and it's meant to sort of that. So a lot of games, it grinds with combat. It does a thing. And so Retrostar was really designed to sort of have this beginning, middle, and end. And as we played, and we discussed it when we played, like, I'm tracking the numbers, so I'm like, oh, we're nearing the end of the act, so let's wrap up this thing. And as we played, we just dropped some things, and not in a bad way. We're just like, we're not watching a documentary of real time. We're watching sort of the story beats of a TV show. We're like, okay, we're jumping forward to this. And I was like, cool. We don't need to worry about this other stuff. Just like in a role-playing game, you're not like, how are you going to go to the bathroom in the woods? No one cares. Like, let's move on.
Right.
So, yeah, so that's one of the things that it makes for sort of a definitive experience as you sort of feel the story unfolding and evolving along the way. And because it's a television show, like, your characters have sort of plot immunity, like, they can do things, there'll be consequences, but we know that, like, you're not going to die.
Right.
Or whatever the equivalent of dying is. Like, something bad may happen, and we had a situation where, like, I want to succeed, but I'm going to go control. And then I say, well, next thing you know, you're in this shack with a bunch of people. And you can't say, I didn't do that. You say, okay, cool. We've moved in a new direction. You got what you wanted, but sometimes, that goes a different way. So I think, bringing it back to sort of therapy and stuff like this, I think it is a chance to provoke a conversation with someone. So if someone were to say, I want to do a thing, you could pause for a minute and say, okay, what do you think the consequences are? And it requires the game master's got to be on their game and willing to sort of move directions. But I think it's a chance also out of discussion. Playing D&D, you can say, what are the consequences of the blade barrier? The player can say, well, even if all 8 D8s rolled max damage at 64 plus 16, that's 80 damage. I have 140 hit points. I'm not worried.
Mm-hmm.
No, but you're supposed to be terrified of this thing. It's an 8th level spell. What's it going to do to me? You can't. D&D is based upon the principle of the rules are written, and if the GM changes the rules, that's inherently unfair, right? Could we agree on that? That, like, if the GM said, no, that's not, you go through the blade barrier and it kills you. As a player, you're like, what? Is this a new spell? Your wizard's going to be like, cool, I'm going to look up that spell so I can learn it. The fighter's going to be like, no, that's not the way the spell works. So you've made a new thing that your character they're going, great, I'm going to try and find out how to cast the spell. But you can't sort of wing it. You've got it, everything's very granular, everything will be broken down to this thing. Another example is you're in a tower. If you're an old school D&D player, you're in a tower 100 feet high. Character says, I jump out the window. Because why? What's the worst that can happen?
It's only 10d6 damage. I can survive that.
Exactly, right? And so, that's not a place for discussion. Whereas, like, a human being jumps out of a 20-foot window, they're going to, you can do a roll like Captain Kirk, but you're going to get a little hurt.
I haven't jumped out of a 20-foot window yet. It's not pleasant.
Yeah, and then to be like, well, the worst that's going to happen is this. And there are systems that try and sort of replicate real world and have these, like, cascading charts that you go to and this and that. And that's fine. Retrostar is like, okay, what are the things that are going to happen to you if you jump out the window? Like, okay, but in TV shows, characters can do that, but maybe it goes somewhere else. Like the giant hawk picks you up or whatever. Who knows? But, sort of that idea, you can talk about consequences because it's not defined and predefined, whereas, that playing D&D many times is just a game of a choice, and sort of people who are smarter than me and have the sort of language and lingo down can explain that, like, it's all about sort of your, assessing, sort of your threat and figuring out what everything is. So,
sure.
Retrostar is very narrative and very much can sort of be part of a conversation. Sorry.
Nope, that answers the question well, I think.
Definitely.
All right.
So I think you kind of touched on a lot of points for this question, but what do you think sets Retrostar apart from other tabletop games?
Well, I think that idea so the core mechanic of Retrostar, for those who don't know, is it's inspired by the Apocalypse, which is that sort of like you roll 2d6 and you get 2 to 6, 7 to 9, or 10 to 12. So it uses that basic idea, which is 2 to 6 is failure, 7 to 9 is a complicated something there, and 10 or above is success. And I've run the numbers, and the numbers are in the book about, even if you're rolling 5 dice and keeping your best 2, what your chances are of getting 10 or higher, they get better, but they don't get, like, phenomenally better. 7 to 9 puts you in the realm of you can either fail or succeed, but you can do a thing that very few other games do, which is give up control of your character. When we play a role-playing game, the one thing we know is that we have control of our character, right? I can walk through a blade barrier because I have control of my character, and I know, the player, what the effect is going to be. And if the GM says, well, no, you can't do this, I'm like, well, that's not fair because that's not what the rules are. When I cast blade barrier, it does this thing. So you can't mix up the rules on me. In Retrostar, you're giving up control of your character with the sort of understanding between the GM and the players that anything that happens to the character is going to drive the story forward. which I think is interesting. And I think that that's what sets it apart, that the most valuable thing a character has is not hit points. The most valuable thing a character has is sort of free will. And so when you take some of that free will away, all under the pact of we're just trying to tell a story that's engaging, that's where it gets interesting. D&D is not engaging when you jump out the 100-foot window or you walk through the blade barrier, because you're just like, you know. And I've played enough D&D, and there are times where the GM has this big idea and someone says, I do this. And and if you've played a lot of D&D, that game master's like, you see their shoulders slump.
I can't tell you how many times my GM has given me that look.
Yeah. And then you're like, okay, I need a break. I need to go get some coffee. And you're like, they beat it. Whereas Retrostar, it's all about the story's going to end when it ends. And, you know, it's just, you're just giving up control to do an interesting thing. But that sort of idea, and obviously Spectrum's done other things. As mentioned, the core idea of the intention system has been used in other systems. But I think something like that is neat because it doesn't break it down in any sort of granular way, and it doesn't make it sort of any way that can be vindictive. It's a way that you're sort of doing something and you're saying, we are all working together, you know. And it's a collaborative game, but obviously there's game masters. There are games that are like GM-less, which, you know, someone still needs to read the rules and know how the game works. But we'll say that they're GM-less. But this game, I think that's interesting, sort of take control of a character way. And I don't mean that in a way that, like, you don't have consent, you know, like because that's a big thing in gaming, sort of consent of stuff. And it's not meant to be that. It's more like, you know, the way it's all approached is via acting, whether it's for television or for the stage. And the director saying, I don't want you to do it that way. I want you to do it this way. And if the actor keeps doing it, they may lose their job. So there are times where you just have to do the things that the director tells you to do. And that's what this is. So that's what I think makes it interesting. Additionally, I think the mechanics are relatively simple and they move the action forward. And what's great about it, if you develop a series, so if we were to all live in the same town or we were to all play games together, we could develop a series. You could have your characters, we could have our series. And you might say, hey, it's Wednesday night, we have some free time. I could say, sure, give me 15 minutes, I'll come up with an episode. And it's meant to have this sort of very, like, you can, and if you've watched TV, some episodes stink, that's okay. You know, but this idea that, like, it can still have the flavor of sort of a thing. Whereas when you're prepping, if you're so you're the GM in all your games, it's a lot of work GMing. Like, you know, you're thinking about, you have to know the rules better than anyone else. And then if you're running a very granular game, you've got to figure out all the challenges and all this stuff. Whereas this is meant to be like, cool, I've got an idea for a game. You don't need to have a lot of notes, just maybe a list of names like I do, and you can run a game, you know, and just sort of move things forward.
Definitely. Conrad, I'll let you take the next one.
Okay, so I think just the next one would be just, what's your ideal character to build in Retrostar?
To play? I've never played Retrostar. I've only run it.
Really? Okay.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. So I don't. It really depends on. So for me, so when it comes to playing a character, I think there's all different types of player archetypes, right? Would we agree with that?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
I tend to be of the type that, like, I want to play a character who's going to fill in the cracks, but is also going to make sure that we don't get stuck in a rut. So I will tend to play sort of a leader type, and not like a commander, but just sort of like the character who's like, hey, let's go do this thing, or let's try and come up with a plan to do something or whatever. Even I'm playing in a DC Comics game. I don't know if you guys know comics at all. And I'm playing Booster Gold, who's kind of a nitwit, but I'm still taking on some of that role. Like, guys, what are we doing next? And sort of push the plot forward. I think in Retrostar, if I were to play a game, I would want to be.
Sorry, you chose to play as Booster Gold, or was that like a randomly assigned thing?
So, my buddy. Okay, here's the quick story. Someone was running a DC game at Gen Con, like a Justice League game, and my buddy's a huge DC fan, and he loves Ted Kord, Blue Beetle, and obviously Ted and Booster are buddies. And so I emailed the GM, I was like, hey, can we play Ted and Booster? And he's like, ugh. Sure, I guess so. And we're playing the old DC Mayfair game, which says it can do all these things. The reality of it is, if you're more powerful, you're more powerful. Superman is better than Booster Gold because he's going to make his roles better. But that doesn't mean Booster Gold's incompetent. So we played Ted and Booster, and everyone was playing like the higher powered characters and playing the numbers on the page. And that's a separate sort of gaming tangent. The whole idea that when you hand someone a character, everything should be there for them to play the character the way they're meant to be played. So Superman's like killing people. You know, he's like, oh, boom, I kill. Oh, that person's possessed. I punch him. And Ted and Booster are like, "What are you doing, Superman? Like, you can't kill people." And so we became friends with the GM, and we played again with him, and then he's running an online game. So I'm playing Booster by choice because my friend likes playing Ted. It is not normally a character I would like to play, but I'm playing him with a little sort of twist of how I like to play characters. I think if I was playing Retrostar, it would depend upon the series. I would probably want to be a more sort of social character that was somewhat intelligent. So I don't know. It would really depend on the series. I mean, there's so many different ideas. Like, do you want to, if you're playing a space trucker series, what kind of space trucker do you want to be? So if you want to hit me with a series and tell me who I'd want to play, I'm happy to answer that question. So
I feel like that mindset of wanting to kind of fill the niche that might not be present in the group is a very forever GM player mindset, because I'm sure Conrad and I both also are kind of in that mainstream. It's like we'll be the last people in the group to pick our characters, just to make sure that the cohesion in the party is solid.
Well, and the other thing, and this isn't a knock on players at all, but this happens with my group of friends who I play with when I play games. Like, people will do things, but if you don't have a character who's pushing things forward, you can just sit there and everyone's like,
Oh, exactly. And
so,
from a storyteller's mindset, being able to kind of help the storyteller push the story along if the other players are distracted by random NPC here or event there.
Yeah, I had a, and this was sort of like one of these realization points for me. I had a character I was playing in a game, and I wanted my character to never speak. And it was like, he was like big and sort of this, and he could speak, but he was very sort of terse and short with words. And I wanted him to sort of, I had this whole sort of, not like everyone needs a backstory, but I had this idea, and I had an idea of where things might go in the future and sort of how he would interact with the world. And I thought this would be really cool. Well, it was cool until I realized the other players weren't the types of players to push things forward. So what do you guys want to do? Well, I don't know. So I had to swerve and change that. And that was sort of a realization point for me that if I play this type of character, and that's not, I played in games like that where people hate my character, and that's okay too, because that does that whole role play thing. So with Retrostar, I think it's interesting, and we didn't, and we can try, because obviously we're in the middle of the session. If we want to try next time to have opposed roles are neat too, because of the way they sort of we can be player versus player or versus significant NPC, sort of in how they shake down and what happens there, and that's sort of this you're having a debate with someone, whether it's a physical or social debate or whatever, and sort of how things are turning out between the two characters. And it's all simple, but sort of that idea of resolving actions in a way that's interesting. So
I'm sure if Popsy's going to be throwing shade at dinner, there'll definitely be some opposed roles coming in the future for sure.
Throw a lot of shade.
This glistening chest.
Yeah, I know. Just chest open, Sawyer. Why would you ever shave your chest hair?
Better for fluid dynamics, obviously.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry. I'm tangenting on you.
No worries. So as a game developer, what advice would you give to newer gamer developers who are trying to get in on that scene?
As mentioned earlier, there's a couple pieces of advice. One is think about what gameplay is going to feel like if that's something you're interested in. And the second one, another piece of advice is definitely think of the worst players. And I don't mean worst in that bad way. I think of the players who are going to read the rules and interpret the rules literally, try and find the loopholes in the rules. And for me, those players have a name, and it's the name of someone I know. And I always think, what would do? I'm not going to say his names. I don't need to throw shade at anyone. But I always think, how's this player going to interact with the world as defined by the game? And if they are going to interact with the way that's going to break it and make it unfun for people, I want to sort of try and curb that. I have a game. It's a storytelling game. It uses music. It follows sort of the act structure similar to Retrostar. So what happens in the game is the GM comes up with a 30-song playlist, and it's a 3-act structure. So you have 10 acts, 10 songs per act. The song plays in the background. One person has narrative control. They can say whatever they like, whatever they want about the world. You start with a prompt and you go from there. Let the music sort of drive you. And I thought of this, and I thought, what's the worst player? I go to the army base, and I break in, and I grab a nuke, and I've got a nuke, and I launch a nuke, and I kill the bad guy. That's your worst player, right? So I designed the game to okay, great. So the next song plays. another player has narrative control. Okay, what are you going to do with the world now that has happened? So he hasn't won. He hasn't stopped anything. He did a thing. I can't say no to that thing. Great. And then we keep going. And then maybe it becomes a post-apocalyptic, dystopian thing, 500 years in the future. And we have to go from there. Mm-hmm. So that idea of like, think of what that worst player is going to do, how they're going to try and win. And if they can win, if you don't want that, figure out a way sort of to stop them. So, and sometimes that can get to a very granular level. Think of how the dice work or your game mechanics work, but also think about sort of the gameplay. There's nothing wrong with those players. Those players want to sort of push. They want to sort of push at the limits of what the rules can do. If you can think about that player and find a way to sort of keep them engaged in the game, that's going to be a great benefit to you, And I think of games. I also think the other thing is to think about the way different players like to interact with the world. So Retrostar's got the 3 stats. That's it. Everything could be, it's either adventure, which is like physical, thought, thinking, drama, which is like interacting with people. What are the consequences for those roles? Are they all the same? They are, right? D&D, you have hit points, you have your physical traits, then you have your other stuff, as most people call them dumb stats. I don't need that, right? What's the consequences for failing a charisma roll in D&D?
Usually
somebody just not liking you as much.
Yeah, fine, whatever, and they've tried with like skill challenges in 40 and stuff. Some of the Powered by the Apocalypse games, do you guys know them? Yeah. So some of those games try and sort of make it granular. I think my opinion, and this is my opinion, not for game designers, but think about what any role is going to do and think about the consequences of that role. If I can sit here and just make a roll 15 times until I make it because there's no consequences, that's not a lot of fun. So, in D&D, like making that diplomacy roll, oh, I'm going to help, I'm going to assist, but they crunch the numbers like, great, we saved 50%. The GM is just like, thanks for engaging with my world and interacting with them. Well, it says the rules that you can do this. If the GM says you can't, then you're like, but that's what it says. So thinking about what your consequences are of any role. Think about, sort of if you want a streamlined game, if you want a tactical game, again, you need to crunch it even harder. But think about how players interact with the world. I made a game that's about DJs fighting against a tyrannical government, right? And the game very much implicitly and explicitly states there's no real rules for violence in this game. Because in the real world, if you go and punch a cop, what happens?
You get arrested.
You get arrested, you get the crap beat out of you, you die, right? If there's a bunch of Nazis walking down the street and you throw a rock at them, what's going to happen to you? You're going to get shot, killed. Probably. And a lot of games try and say that. So I say, if you do this, this is what happens, black and white. So let's try and resolve problems using different things, different stuff. And it's not saying you can't have that, but it's saying it's not realistic. It doesn't matter, oh, but I've got the stats from my gun and it does a certain thing. So you can also force your game to do a certain thing, but just think about it. To say you're playing wonderful little magical anthropomorphic animals in a world, and to say that there's never ever any violence in the world, like that's fine. But I've played a lot of games. When I go to Gen Con, I play games, and I play games that people are like, oh, this is going to be a game about role playing. This is going to be a game about this or whatever. I played in a 13th Age game, and my character was this weird sort of man of peace. And I tried to talk the villain into not attacking this other villain. And the GM literally stopped and was like, I don't know how to deal with this. Like, all I have is stats for the characters, and it says that they're going to attack no matter what. And I was like, it's fine. You can do what you want to do. But, like, does your game account for a player wanting to approach a problem in a different way? So that's what I tend to think of with games. Like, how can players interact the way that their characters want to interact with the world? If you make a high charisma character in D&D, what does that mean? What can you do?
Yeah. 4th
edition solved this because it was like a board game and your bards, your charisma, help their things here and whatever. But think about that, and so that's what players want to do. They want to be awesome, as we talked earlier. Everyone wants to be awesome. So
definitely. So with Retrostar, now is there additional content that we may see in the future for?
I don't. We released a sort of movie supplement. So if you want to play that farm boy who stares pensively at the 2 sons, you could do that. You have your hairy companion who goes oh, all the time. It's a little different sort of in how it plays. The mechanics are the same. The characters are a little bit more powerful, meaning that they have a trait point or 2 more. We did that. We've talked about doing another supplement for sort of different types of sort of genres of stuff. I don't, like, Cynthia's working on her stuff. Like, I could write the stuff I write quickly, but I don't know that there's time to sort of do anything with it. So that's part of the reason I've decided to do some of my own stuff. We've discussed doing an 80s action one. So think A-Team, think Knight Rider.
Yep.
And I mean, you guys have played the game, and you see how it wouldn't take a lot of changing of the rules to like make those work. And
Right.
the one thing we thought about is you'd have to have a montage mechanic, so you could have your thing where like you build up the 18 van or whatever. Because most of those shows had something like that, where like action stopped, they get ready for the big thing, and then they do the thing. So there's nothing in the pipeline right now. If Cynthia were to say to me, "Hey, I want to get this done," I can write it quickly. So
Cool. No, that's awesome. That's awesome. I would love to see a montage mechanic in a game. That would be great.
Oh, I've got the mechanics for it down. It's just a matter of they just need to be written up. So, I mean, written up and made look nice. This is Cynthia's design, so she makes things look nice. But yeah, so we've talked about that. So that has to do with like the way that basically works is you take dice from your rolls and you put them in a pool for later. So you're maybe failing more along the way.
Okay.
And then you get this cool montage mechanic, and then you can take those dice and add them to rolls to replace dice.
Nice.
So it sort of sets up this like you kind of suck a little more, but then you trick out the van, and then you're like, cool. And then like you roll those dice, and you can just sub them into your roll. So if you roll a 6 and a 5, you could take a 4 and put the 5 back in the pool. So you're like, I still got a 10, I'm good, but now there's a 5 for someone else to take. So
Cool.
pretty simple.
Like
But it doesn't have the cool music, the dun dun dun, or some cheesy 80s song where everyone like takes their shirts off and it's all shiny in the sun. So
Popsy.
Popsy, yeah, well, that's what I'm thinking. Popsy would be all like greased up.
Oh man! All right. Well, you know what, Breck, we definitely appreciate your time today. First running for a session for us, as well as sitting down and talking with us here on the Degecast.
That was my pleasure. Absolutely. Like I said, I'd love to get together in person sometime or do something again. So.
All right. And signing
Us
off.
too.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
I jumped the gun, guys. So let me try that again. Signing off for the Degecast. I'm Nate Lindberg, and you can follow me on Twitter at Nate Lindberg. Conrad, you're on this side of me. Say goodbye.
I'm above you on mine.
Tony, you're down there.
Really? Because you're down here for me.
Oh,
This is a whole mess.
Yeah.
Great.
It's in reverse.
All right, guys. We'll see you next time.